I was nobody the moment before I ruined a duke, and I was something far more dangerous the moment after. They say that silence is the virtue of a governess, that we are meant to exist in the margins of great houses like ghosts who teach children their letters and fade into wallpaper when company arrives. I had perfected this art for 3 years at Ravensbrook Manor, moving through corridors with my eyes cast downward, my voice reserved only for the 2 young girls in my care. I had learned to be invisible. I had learned to survive. But on that September afternoon in 1847, when the autumn sun hung low and golden over the Ascot racecourse, I forgot every lesson I had ever taught myself. My name is Clara Whitmore, and this is the story of how I fell in love with a man who should never have seen me at all. I had not wanted to attend the races. Such events were not meant for women of my station, and I had long ago made peace with the boundaries that separated my world from theirs. But Lady Portmore, the widowed viscountess who employed me, had insisted. Her daughters, Arabella and Catherine, were to witness the spectacle of society at its most glittering, and I was to accompany them as their chaperone, their quiet shadow, their reminder that even in moments of joy, discipline must be maintained. The girls were 12 and 14, old enough to understand the unspoken rules of aristocratic gatherings and young enough to still find wonder in the thundering hooves and the flutter of silk parasols. I stood behind them as they pressed against the white wooden railing, their gloved hands gripping the painted wood, their laughter rising like music into the September air. I remember thinking how beautiful they looked, how untouched by the cruelties of the world, how blissfully unaware that their futures would be determined not by their hearts, but by their dowries. I envied them. God forgive me, but I did. The crowd around us swelled with the perfume of roses and the sharp undertone of cigars. Gentlemen in tall hats discussed odds and bloodlines, while their wives exchanged gossip behind painted fans. I caught fragments of conversation, names I recognized from the society pages that Lady Portmore sometimes left in the morning room. The Earl of Ashworth had wagered £5,000 on a grey mare. Lord Pemberton had lost twice that sum the previous week. And the Duke of Hartwell, they whispered. The Duke of Hartwell had staked £50,000 on a horse called Obsidian. £50,000. The sum was incomprehensible to me. It was more than I would earn in several lifetimes, more than my father had possessed in all his years of honest work. I thought of the cottage where I had grown up, the smell of hay and liniment, the gentle hands that had taught me to read the language of animals before I ever learned to read books. My father had been a veterinarian, a man who served the horses of wealthy men without ever owning one himself. He had died when I was 17, leaving me with nothing but his knowledge and his debts. It was that knowledge, buried so deep I had almost forgotten it existed, that would change everything. The trumpet sounded, and the crowd surged forward. I placed my hands on the shoulders of Arabella and Catherine, steadying them, protecting them from the crush of bodies that pressed toward the railing. The horses were being led to the starting line, magnificent creatures with coats that gleamed like polished mahogany and obsidian and pearl. I watched them with the eyes my father had given me, noting the arch of each neck, the rhythm of each stride, the subtle signs that spoke of strength or weakness, health or hidden pain. And then I saw him. He stood apart from the others, a man whose presence commanded space even in a crowd of hundreds. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a coat of charcoal gray that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was angular and severe, with cheekbones that cast shadows and a jaw that might have been carved from marble. His hair was dark, almost black, swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes were the color of winter storms. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, in the way that cliffs and tempests and wild seas are beautiful. He was the Duke of Hartwell. I had seen him before, of course. He had visited Ravensbrook Manor twice in the 3 years I had been employed there, attending dinners to which I was never invited, moving through rooms I was permitted to clean but never to occupy. I had glimpsed him from doorways, from the top of staircases, from the shadows where governesses belonged. He had never once looked in my direction. He had never once known I existed. He was speaking to another gentleman, a man with ruddy cheeks and an eager expression. And though I could not hear their words, I could read the Duke's posture. There was tension in the line of his shoulders, impatience in the tap of his gloved fingers against his thigh. He was waiting for the race, waiting to see his 50,000 pounds either doubled or destroyed. The horses approached, and my gaze drifted from the Duke to the animals. There were 8 of them, each more splendid than the last, their jockeys small and bright in silks of crimson and emerald and gold. I found the black horse almost immediately. Obsidian was magnificent, his coat so dark it seemed to swallow the sunlight, his mane flowing like a banner of night. He tossed his head as he walked, proud and powerful, the kind of horse that poets wrote about and painters immortalized. But something was wrong. I saw it in the slight hesitation of his left hind leg, the almost imperceptible shortening of his stride. It was so subtle that no one else would notice, so faint that even experienced horsemen might dismiss it as imagination. But I had spent my childhood in stables, watching my father examine hundreds of horses, learning to see what others could not. Obsidian was lame, not severely, not obviously, but enough. Enough that the strain of a race would worsen it. Enough that the horse might stumble. Enough that 50,000 pounds and perhaps a life hung in the balance of a single misstep. I should have said nothing. I knew this even as my feet began to move. I should have remained in my place, silent and invisible. A governess who understood that the affairs of dukes were none of her concern. What did it matter if a wealthy man lost his wager? What did it matter if a proud horse fell? These were not my burdens to bear. These were not my battles to fight. But my father's voice whispered in my memory, gentle and insistent. A horse cannot speak for itself, Clara. We must speak for them. I moved through the crowd as if in a dream, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. I did not know what I would say or how I would say it. I knew only that I could not stand by and watch a beautiful creature destroy itself for the entertainment of those who saw it as nothing more than a vessel for their vanity. The Duke was alone now, his companion having drifted toward the betting tables. He stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the starting line, his expression unreadable. I approached from behind, close enough to smell the faint scent of sandalwood and tobacco that clung to his coat. My mouth was dry, my hands were trembling. "Your Grace," I said, and my voice was barely more than a whisper. He did not turn. He did not acknowledge me. I was invisible, just as I had always been. I stepped closer, close enough to breach every rule of propriety, close enough to condemn myself. "Your Grace," I said again, and this time I reached out and touched his arm. He spun around, and for the first time in my life, I looked directly into the eyes of Sebastian Vance, the Duke of Hartwell. They were gray, those eyes. Gray, like smoke and steel and the sky before a storm. They widened with surprise, then narrowed with something colder. Displeasure, disdain. The look a man gives to an insect that has dared to land upon his sleeve. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, and his voice was low and sharp, a blade wrapped in velvet. I swallowed hard. "The horse," I said. "The black horse. Obsidian." His expression did not change, but something flickered in his gaze. "What about him?" "He is lame, Your Grace, his left hind leg. The injury is slight, but it will worsen under strain. If he races today, he will fall." For a moment, there was only silence between us. The crowd roared around us, oblivious, eager, hungry for spectacle. The Duke stared at me as if I had spoken in a language he did not understand, as if I had appeared from thin air to deliver a prophecy he had not requested. And then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had never been contradicted by anyone beneath him. The laugh of a man who found absurdity in the very suggestion that a woman in a plain gray dress might know something he did not. "You are either mad or very foolish," he said. "Perhaps both. Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Your Grace. I also know horses. My father was a veterinarian. I have spent my life learning to see what others cannot. And I am telling you, with absolute certainty, that Obsidian is lame." His laughter died. The storm in his eyes darkened, and for the first time I saw anger there. True anger, the kind that burns cold and slow. "You dare," he said, and the words were barely audible. "You dare to approach me, to touch me, to presume to tell me about my own horse? I dare because no one else will. I dare because that horse deserves better than to be crippled for the sake of a wager. I dare, Your Grace, because I have nothing left to lose." The words hung between us, bold and terrible and true. I had sealed my fate. I knew it even as I stood there, refusing to lower my gaze, refusing to retreat. By morning, Lady Portmore would receive a letter from the Duke himself, demanding my dismissal. By evening, I would be turned out without a reference, without a future, without hope. I had sacrificed everything for a horse I did not own and a man who despised me. The trumpet sounded again, signaling the final call. The Duke's jaw tightened. He turned away from me, turned toward the racecourse, and for a breathless moment, I thought he would ignore me entirely, would let his pride carry him forward into ruin. But then he raised his hand. I watched, stunned, as he signaled to a man near the betting tables. I watched as hurried words were exchanged, as papers were produced and signed, as £50,000 were withdrawn from the wager on Obsidian. The crowd murmured with confusion. The odds shifted like sand. The race began. Obsidian ran like a shadow, like a dream, like the wind made flesh. He was beautiful and doomed, and I saw the moment it happened, the moment his left hind leg buckled beneath him at the first turn. He did not fall completely, but he stumbled, losing precious seconds, losing his rhythm, losing any chance of victory. The other horses surged past him, and the crowd gasped with disbelief. The Duke had not moved. He stood perfectly still, his face a mask of stone, his eyes fixed on the horse that had nearly destroyed him. When Obsidian crossed the finish line in last place, limping visibly now, the Duke finally turned. He looked at me, and in his gaze, I saw something I had never expected to see. Not gratitude exactly, and not kindness, but recognition, acknowledgement. The reluctant respect of a man who had been saved by someone he had dismissed as nothing. "It seems," he said quietly, "that I owe you a debt, Miss." "Whitmore," I whispered. "Clara Whitmore. Miss Whitmore." He spoke my name as if tasting it, as if deciding whether it was worthy of his memory. "You have cost me my pride today, but you have saved me my fortune. I am not certain which loss troubles me more. I did not know how to respond. I did not know if a response was expected. The world around us continued in its chaos, gentlemen cursing their bad luck, ladies fanning themselves in distress, but we stood in a pocket of stillness. Two people who should never have spoken, who should never have touched, who should never have seen each other at all. "Where do you reside?" he asked. "I am the governess at Ravensbrook Manor, Your Grace. I serve Lady Portmore." Something shifted in his expression. "Ravensbrook. I know it. I have dined there." "Yes, Your Grace. And you have been there all this time, in the shadows, watching." It was not a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." He studied me for a long moment, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing, pressing against my skin, searching for something I could not name. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a card, cream-colored and embossed with gold. "You will call upon Hartwell House tomorrow at 3 o'clock, he said. "We have matters to discuss." I stared at the card in his outstretched hand. "Your Grace, I cannot possibly." "You will come, Miss Whitmore." He pressed the card into my palm, and his fingers brushed mine, and I felt a shock of heat that traveled from my hand to my heart. That is not a request. Before I could speak, before I could protest, before I could do anything at all, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, like a specter returning to the darkness from which it had come. I stood there for what felt like hours, clutching his card, trembling with something I could not name, fear perhaps, or wonder, or the terrible, exhilarating knowledge that my life had just changed in ways I could not yet imagine. When I finally returned to Arabella and Catherine, they were chattering about the race, about the shocking fall of the favored horse, about the mysterious whispers that the Duke of Hartwell had withdrawn his bet at the very last moment. They did not notice my silence. They did not notice the card hidden in my glove. They did not notice that their governess had become something new, something dangerous, something that could not be unnamed. That night, in my small room at Ravensbrook Manor, I sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the gardens. I thought about my father, about the lessons he had taught me, about the strange and winding path that had led me from his deathbed to this moment. I thought about Sebastian Vance, about the storm in his eyes, about the heat of his fingers against mine. And I thought about tomorrow, about Hartwell House, about the debt a duke believed he owed to a governess. I did not sleep that night. How could I? I had spent 3 years learning to be invisible, learning to want nothing, learning to expect nothing. And now, in the space of a single afternoon, I had been seen. I had been summoned. I had been given a card with a golden crest and an address that belonged to one of the most powerful men in England. I should have been afraid. I should have burned the card and forgotten the Duke and returned to my quiet life of lessons and shadows. But as I sat there in the darkness, listening to the wind whisper through the trees, I felt something stirring in my chest. Hope. Terrible, foolish, impossible hope. I pressed my hand against my heart and wondered if this was how it felt to stand at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the fall would either kill you or teach you to fly. Tomorrow, I would find out which. The carriage that arrived for me at 2:30 was finer than any I had ever entered. I had not expected one at all. I had spent the morning in a state of quiet agony, teaching Arabella her French conjugations and helping Catherine with her embroidery, all while my thoughts circled endlessly around the card hidden in my bureau drawer. I had not told Lady Portmore about my encounter with the Duke. I had not told anyone. What would I have said? That I had approached one of the most powerful men in England uninvited, touched his arm, contradicted his judgment, and been rewarded with a summons to his home? The story sounded like madness even to my own ears. By noon, I had convinced myself that I would not go. The risk was too great, the impropriety too severe. A governess did not call upon a duke. A governess did not accept mysterious invitations. A governess remained in her place, quiet and contained, until she was old enough to be pensioned off or desperate enough to accept a position in some remote household where no one asked questions about her past. But then the carriage appeared. It rolled up the gravel drive of Ravensbrook Manor at precisely 2:30, black and gleaming, drawn by a matched pair of grey horses whose coats shone like silver in the afternoon light. The footman who descended wore the Hartwell livery, midnight blue with gold braid, and when he approached the servants' entrance and asked for Miss Clara Whitmore, the entire kitchen fell silent. I remember the way they looked at me. Cook, with her flour-dusted hands frozen over the bread dough. Mary, the scullery maid, her eyes wide as saucers. Even Mr. Bramwell, the butler, who prided himself on his unshakable composure, stared at me as if I had suddenly grown wings. "Miss Whitmore," the footman said, and his voice was polite but firm. "His Grace the Duke of Hartwell has sent me to escort you to Hartwell House. The carriage is waiting." I could have refused. I could have claimed illness or prior obligations or simple unwillingness. But something in me had shifted overnight, some small and reckless part of my soul that was tired of hiding, tired of shrinking, tired of being nothing to everyone. I smoothed my plain gray dress, lifted my chin, and followed the footman out into the September afternoon. The carriage interior was upholstered in velvet, the color of midnight, and it smelled of leather and something faintly floral, perhaps lavender or jasmine. I sat alone on the cushioned seat, my hands folded in my lap, my heart beating so violently I was certain the footman could hear it through the walls. Through the window, I watched the familiar landscape of Ravensbrook fade into the distance, replaced by rolling hills and ancient oaks and the long, winding road that led toward London. Hartwell House was not in the city itself, but on its outskirts, a vast estate that sprawled across hundreds of acres of manicured gardens and wild parkland. I had heard of it, of course. Everyone had heard of it. It was said to be one of the finest houses in England, built by the first Duke of Hartwell in the reign of Queen Anne, and expanded by each generation since. It was said to contain a library of 10,000 volumes, a gallery of priceless paintings, and a ballroom that could hold 500 guests. It was said to be magnificent. The rumors, I discovered, had not done it justice. The house rose before me like a palace from a fairy tale, its stone facade glowing amber in the afternoon sun. There were columns and balustrades, arched windows and climbing roses, a fountain in the circular drive that sent water cascading into a basin of pale marble. I pressed my face to the carriage window like a child, unable to contain my wonder, unable to pretend sophistication I did not possess. The carriage stopped. The footman opened the door, and I stepped out into a world that had never been meant for me. A butler awaited me at the great front doors, an elderly man with silver hair and a face that revealed nothing. He bowed slightly and introduced himself as Mr. Harding, and when he spoke my name, there was no judgment in his voice, no curiosity, no disdain. He simply led me through the entrance hall and up a grand staircase and down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, until we reached a set of double doors carved with the Hartwell crest. "His Grace will receive you in the study," Mr. Harding said, and then he opened the doors and stepped aside, and I walked into the presence of Sebastian Vance for the second time in my life. He was standing by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light, and for a moment I could see only his outline, tall and broad and imposing. Then he turned, and I saw his face, and I felt that same strange shock I had felt at the racecourse, that same electricity that seemed to arc between us like lightning seeking ground. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice was different than it had been yesterday, softer perhaps, or simply less hostile. "You came. You sent a carriage, Your Grace." It seemed rude to refuse. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, perhaps, or surprise. Most women would have refused regardless. Most women would have been too afraid. I am not most women. No. He moved away from the window, and I saw now that the study was lined with books, hundreds of them, thousands of them, leather-bound and gold-lettered and arranged with meticulous care. He gestured to a chair near the fireplace, and I sat, and he remained standing, pacing slowly before me like a predator considering its prey. "No, you are certainly not." Silence stretched between us, thick and strange. I watched him pace, watched the way the light caught the planes of his face, watched the tension in his shoulders that never seemed to ease. He was dressed more casually today than he had been at the races, his coat discarded, his cravat loosened. But there was nothing casual about his presence. He filled the room simply by existing in it. "I have made inquiries about you," he said finally, and my heart stuttered in my chest. "Clara Whitmore, daughter of Thomas Whitmore, veterinarian, deceased. Educated at a small school in Hertfordshire, employed as a governess for the past 4 years. No family, no fortune, no prospects." The words stung, though I knew they were true. "You have been thorough, Your Grace. I am always thorough." He stopped pacing and fixed me with those storm-gray eyes. What I cannot understand is why a woman of your intelligence and education has resigned herself to such a life. You could have been a teacher, a writer, a companion to some wealthy widow with a taste for conversation. Instead, you hide in other people's houses, teaching other people's children, waiting for nothing. I did not choose this life, Your Grace. I was given it. Were you? He moved closer, and I became acutely aware of the space between us, of the way it seemed to shrink with every step he took. Or did you simply accept the first option that presented itself, the safest path, the road that required the least courage? The accusation was unfair, and I felt anger rise in my throat like bile. You know nothing of my circumstances. You know nothing of what I have sacrificed, what I have endured, what I have lost. You sit in your palace surrounded by your paintings and your books and your servants, and you presume to lecture me about courage? I expected anger in return. I expected him to dismiss me, to call for his butler, to have me thrown out into the drive like the impudent servant I was. But instead, he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was sharp and strange, a crack in the marble of his composure. There she is, he said softly. The woman from the racecourse, the woman who dared to touch a duke. I did not know how to respond. I sat very still, my hands gripping the arms of my chair, my breath coming too fast. You asked me yesterday why you had spoken, he continued. You said you had nothing left to lose. I have thought about that answer, Miss Whitmore. I have turned it over in my mind like a stone in my pocket, and I find that I do not believe you. Your Grace? He sat down across from me, and suddenly we were close, closer than propriety allowed, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. A woman with nothing to lose does not tremble, he said. A woman with nothing to lose does not flush when she speaks. You have something, Miss Whitmore. Something precious, something you are terrified of losing. I merely wish to know what it is. I could not speak. I could not breathe. He saw too much, this man. He looked at me and saw through every wall I had built, every mask I had worn, every lie I had told myself in the dark of the night. There is a child, I whispered, and the words escaped before I could stop them, torn from some deep place I had thought forever sealed. A boy. He is 4 years old. He lives with a family in the country. I pay for his care. I visit when I can. He is everything to me, Your Grace. Everything. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the Duke's face, searching for disgust, for judgment, for the cold dismissal I had seen in every other face when my secret had been discovered. But his expression remained unreadable, a mask of stone that revealed nothing. The father? He asked quietly. Gone. He was a gentleman. He promised marriage. He lied. I realized the truth too late, and by then I was already ruined. And the child? Healthy, happy, loved by the family who cares for him. I closed my eyes, and I felt tears burning behind my lids, tears I had refused to shed for 4 long years. They believe I am his aunt. They believe his mother died in childbirth. It is a lie, Your Grace, but it is a lie that protects him. If the truth were known, if anyone discovered that he is the illegitimate son of a governess, his life would be destroyed before it had even begun. When I opened my eyes, the Duke was watching me with an expression I could not name. It was not pity exactly, and not sympathy. It was something older, something deeper, something that spoke of wounds that had never healed. I understand, he said, and his voice was very low. I understand more than you know. Your Grace? He rose from his chair and walked to the window, and when he spoke again, his voice was distant, as if he were speaking to someone who was not in the room at all. I had a brother once, younger than me by 3 years. He was everything I was not. Kind, gentle, quick to laugh. Our father despised him for it. Said he was weak, said he would never amount to anything. He paused, and I saw his hand clench into a fist at his side. When Edmund was 19, he fell in love with a servant girl, a kitchen maid, beautiful and sweet and entirely beneath him. Our father discovered the affair and gave Edmund a choice: end it immediately or be disowned, stripped of his name, his inheritance, everything. What did he choose? The Duke turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that looked like grief, old and familiar and never quite forgotten. He chose her. He married her in secret. They ran away together, to America, to start a new life far from the poison of our family. Our father never spoke his name again. And you? I did nothing. I stood by and watched my brother be destroyed, and I said nothing, and I did nothing because I was afraid, because I was a coward, because I had been taught that duty mattered more than love, that appearance mattered more than truth, that the family name was more important than the family itself. He moved toward me, and I saw that his mask had cracked, that beneath the marble was something raw and human and achingly vulnerable. Edmund died 3 years ago. Fever, his wife wrote to tell me. By then, our father was also dead, and I was the Duke. And there was no one left to punish and no one left to blame. I inherited everything, Miss Whitmore. The title, the estates, the fortune, the power, and none of it matters. None of it brings him back. None of it erases the silence when he needed me to speak. I did not know I was crying until I felt the tears on my cheeks. I did not know I had risen from my chair until I found myself standing before him, close enough to touch, close enough to see the silver tracks that glistened on his own face. "We are alike," he said softly, "both haunted, both hiding, both carrying secrets that would destroy us if the world ever learned the truth." "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Why me? Why now?" "Because you saved me yesterday. Not just my fortune. You saved me from myself, from my pride, from the recklessness that has governed my life since Edmund died." He reached out, and his fingers brushed my cheek, wiping away a tear with a gentleness I had not expected, a tenderness that broke something open in my chest. "And because I see myself in you, Miss Whitmore, I see a woman who has been made to feel worthless, invisible, expendable. And I know that she is none of those things." I could not speak. I could not move. I stood there in his study, surrounded by his books and his ghosts and his grief, and I felt something shift between us, some invisible barrier crumbling into dust. "I want to help you," he said. "Your son. I can arrange for his care, his education, his future. I can ensure that he never wants for anything, that he has every opportunity that circumstance has denied him." "Why would you do that?" "Because I could not save my brother." His voice cracked, and I heard the pain in it, raw and unguarded and terribly real. "Because I have spent 3 years searching for a way to atone, a way to prove that I am not the man my father made me. Because helping you, Miss Whitmore, might be the first decent thing I have done since Edmund walked out of this house and never returned." The clock on the mantel chimed 4, and the sound broke the spell that had held us both. The Duke stepped back, and I saw the mask returning, the stone settling back into place over the vulnerable man beneath. "You should return to Ravensbrook," he said, and his voice was formal again, distant, the voice of a duke addressing a servant. "The carriage will take you. But I wish to see you again, Miss Whitmore. Tomorrow. The day after. As often as you can manage without arousing suspicion. Your Grace, I cannot simply—" "You can." His eyes met mine, and I saw the steel in them, the will that had built empires and broken enemies. "You will. Because you want to, Miss Whitmore, because for the first time in 4 years, someone has seen you, and you are not ready to be invisible again." He was right. God help me. He was right. I left Hartwell House in a daze, my mind spinning, my heart racing, my entire understanding of the world turned inside out. The carriage carried me back through the golden afternoon, past the ancient oaks and rolling hills, past the iron gates that marked the boundary between his world and mine. And all the way home, I thought about his hand on my cheek, his tears mingling with mine, his promise to help the child I had never expected anyone to acknowledge. I thought about Edmund, the brother he had lost. I thought about my son, the secret I carried. I thought about the strange and terrible symmetry of our pain, the way two broken people had found each other in the most unlikely of places. Most of all, I thought about his eyes, gray as winter storms, gray as the sky before rain, gray as the ashes of everything I had once believed about myself and my place in the world. I did not know what was happening between us. I did not know if it was gratitude or grief or something far more dangerous. I knew only that I would return to Hartwell House tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Because he was right about one thing. I was not ready to be invisible again. The autumn deepened, and so did we. What began as a debt became something far more complicated, far more dangerous, far more alive. I returned to Hartwell House the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. We told ourselves it was practical, necessary, a matter of arranging the details of his offer to help my son. There were documents to review, funds to establish, schools to consider. The Duke approached the matter with the same meticulous attention he brought to all his affairs, producing lists and recommendations and carefully researched options as if my boy's future were a military campaign to be won through superior planning. But the documents were pretense, and we both knew it. We spent hours in his study, yes, but the conversations wandered far from matters of finance and education. He told me about his childhood, about the cold magnificence of Hartwell House and the colder magnificence of his father. He told me about Cambridge, where he had studied philosophy and dreamed of becoming a scholar before duty called him home. He told me about the loneliness that had defined his adult life, the endless parade of society events and empty conversations and women who saw only his title and his fortune and never bothered to look beneath. And I told him about myself, about my father, who had taught me to love animals and books and the quiet satisfaction of useful work. About my mother, who had died when I was 12, leaving a silence in our cottage that never quite filled. About the gentleman who had seduced me with promises and poetry, who had disappeared the moment I told him I was with child, who had left me to face the consequences alone. I had never spoken these words aloud to anyone. I had carried them inside me like stones, heavy and cold, weighing me down with every step. But when I spoke them to Sebastian, for he had become Sebastian in my mind, even if I never dared call him that aloud, the stones seemed to lose their weight. The words floated up and out of me, and I watched them drift away like leaves on water, and I felt lighter than I had in years. It was on the 7th day that everything changed. I arrived at Hartwell House to find the Duke agitated, pacing before the fireplace with a letter crumpled in his hand. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with an anger I had not seen since the racecourse. "What has happened?" I asked, and the words came out sharper than I intended, colored by the fear that had gripped my heart the moment I saw his expression. He did not answer immediately. He continued to pace, his boots striking the carpet with a rhythm that spoke of barely contained fury. Then he stopped, turned to face me, and held out the letter. "Read it," he said. "Read it and tell me I should not burn this house to the ground." I took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was expensive, cream-colored and thick, and the handwriting was elegant and feminine. I scanned the words quickly, then read them again more slowly, and by the time I finished, my own hands were shaking with something that was not quite fear and not quite rage, but some terrible combination of both. The letter was from Lady Constance Pemberton, a woman whose name I knew from the society pages and the whispered gossip of the servants' hall. She was a widow, wealthy and beautiful and ruthless, a fixture of London society who had set her sights on the Duke of Hartwell years ago and had never quite accepted his lack of interest. The letter was brief and pointed, She had heard rumors, she wrote, that the Duke had been entertaining a governess at Hartwell House, alone, repeatedly. She wished to remind him that such behavior, while perhaps amusing to a man of his station, could destroy a woman of no consequence whatsoever. She hoped he would consider the implications before continuing down such a reckless path. And if he wished to discuss the matter further, she would be delighted to receive him at Pemberton House at his earliest convenience. The threat was unmistakable. Lady Constance knew about my visits. Lady Constance had the power to ruin me with a single well-placed word. And Lady Constance was making it very clear that she expected something in return for her silence. "How does she know?" I whispered, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and distant and frightened. "Servants talk," the Duke said bitterly. "Or perhaps she has spies among my staff. It does not matter how she knows. What matters is that she does, and she intends to use that knowledge to her advantage. What does she want?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She wants me, Miss Whitmore. She has wanted me for years. She believes that if she can remove any obstacles from her path, I will eventually succumb to her charms and make her the Duchess of Hartwell. She is wrong, of course. I would sooner marry a viper, but she is dangerous nonetheless." I sank into the chair by the fireplace, the letter still clutched in my hands. My mind was racing, calculating, trying to find a way out of a trap that seemed to close tighter with every passing moment. If Lady Constance spoke, if she breathed even a hint of scandal to the wrong ears, my position at Ravensbrook would be forfeit. Lady Portmore would have no choice but to dismiss me. And without a reference, without income, without any means of supporting myself, I would lose everything. My livelihood, my reputation, my ability to care for my son. "I should not have come here," I said, and my voice broke on the words. "I should have refused your invitation. I should have burned your card and forgotten your face and remained in the shadows where I belonged." The Duke crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt before my chair, taking my hands in his. His grip was warm and strong, and when I looked into his eyes, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. "Do not say that," he said fiercely. "Do not ever say that. You are the only real thing that has happened to me in years. The only person who has seen me, spoken to me, challenged me. I will not let that woman take you from me. I will not let anyone take you from me. Your Grace, Sebastian." His hands tightened on mine. "When we are alone, Clara, I want you to call me Sebastian. I cannot. You can. You will. Because what exists between us is not a matter of titles and stations. What exists between us is something I have never felt before, something I did not believe I was capable of feeling, and I will not let society's rules dictate how we speak to each other in the privacy of this room." I stared at him, this man who had seemed so cold and untouchable just days ago. This man who was now kneeling before me like a supplicant, his eyes burning with an intensity that frightened and thrilled me in equal measure. "Sebastian," I whispered, and his name tasted like forbidden fruit on my tongue, sweet and dangerous and impossible to resist. He smiled then, a real smile, the first I had ever seen from him, and it transformed his face utterly. The harsh lines softened, the shadows lifted. For a moment, he was not a duke at all, but simply a man who had been lonely for too long, a man who had found something worth fighting for. "I will handle Lady Constance," he said. "I have weapons of my own, secrets she would not want exposed. She thinks she holds power over me, but she is mistaken. I have spent my life navigating the treacherous waters of society, and I have learned where the bodies are buried, as they say. And if she speaks anyway? If she decides that ruining me is worth whatever retaliation you might offer? Then I will protect you." He rose and drew me to my feet, and suddenly we were standing very close, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body through the thin fabric of my dress. "I will give you a cottage on one of my estates. Far from London, far from anyone who might recognize you. I will ensure that your son is cared for, educated, given every opportunity. I will do whatever it takes, Clara, to keep you safe. Why? The question escaped me before I could stop it, before I could remind myself that I had no right to ask it. Why would you risk so much for me? I am nothing to you. A governess? A fallen woman? A liability. He reached up and cupped my face in his hands, and I felt the roughness of his palms against my cheeks, the trembling in his fingers that belied his steady voice. You are everything to me, he said. I did not know it until I saw you at that race course, standing in your plain gray dress, daring to tell a duke he was wrong. I did not understand it until I sat in this room and listened to you speak of your pain, your sacrifices, your fierce and unbreakable love for a child the world would condemn you for bearing. But I know it now, Clara. I know it with a certainty I have never felt about anything in my life. He leaned closer, and I felt his breath warm against my lips, and every rational thought fled from my mind like birds startled from a tree. I am falling in love with you, he whispered. God help me, but I am. The kiss that followed was inevitable. I had known it was coming from the moment I first touched his arm at the racecourse, from the moment I looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw something wild and desperate looking back at me. His lips met mine with a tenderness that made me want to weep, a gentleness that spoke of reverence rather than conquest. I had been kissed before by the man who had ruined me, but those kisses had been hungry and selfish and ultimately empty. This was different. This was a question, not a demand. This was an offering, not a taking. I answered with everything I had. I pressed myself against him and let his arms wrap around me, and for one perfect moment, there was nothing else in the world but the two of us, two broken people finding solace in each other's brokenness. When we finally pulled apart, we were both trembling. His forehead rested against mine, and I could hear his breath coming fast and uneven, could feel his heart pounding against my chest. This is madness, I said, and my voice was barely audible. This can never be. I know. You are a duke. I am a governess. Society will never accept us. Your family will never accept us. We would be destroying ourselves for something that cannot last. I know. Then why? Why are we doing this? He pulled back slightly, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke it aloud. Because some things are worth destroying oneself for. Because a life lived in safety is not a life at all, only a long and colorless death. Because I would rather have one moment of genuine feeling than a lifetime of the emptiness I have known until now. I had no response to that. I had no defense against a man who spoke the deepest truths of my own heart as if he had read them in a book. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, not speaking, not kissing, simply existing together in a space that felt removed from time and consequence. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside the study, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the walls. I should go, I said finally, though every part of me screamed in protest. Lady Portmore will wonder where I am. Yes. He released me slowly, reluctantly, as if the act of letting go caused him physical pain. You should go. But you will come back. It was not a question, and I did not treat it as one. I will come back, I said. God help me, Sebastian. I will always come back. The carriage ride to Ravensbrook was a blur. I sat in the velvet darkness and pressed my fingers to my lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, still tasting him on my tongue. My mind was chaos, a whirlwind of terror and exhilaration and disbelief. I had kissed a duke. I had been kissed by a duke. I had heard him say that he was falling in love with me, and I had not run away, had not laughed in disbelief, had not reminded him of all the reasons why such a thing was impossible. Because I felt it too. That was the terrible truth I could no longer deny. Somewhere in the space of a week, I had gone from fearing Sebastian Vance to understanding him. From understanding him to caring for him. From caring for him to something that felt dangerously, impossibly close to love. I thought of my son as the carriage rattled through the darkness. I thought of his small face, his bright eyes, the way he laughed when I visited him and called me Aunt Clara and begged me to tell him stories about horses. I had built my entire life around protecting him, around keeping him safe from the scandal of his birth and the cruelty of a world that would punish him for sins he had not committed. And now I was risking everything, for a man who could never truly be mine. But even as I thought these things, I knew I would not stop. I knew I could not stop. Sebastian had awoken something in me that I had believed long dead, some spark of hope and desire and reckless courage that refused to be extinguished. For the first time in 4 years, I felt alive. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like more than a ghost moving through other people's houses. I would be careful. I would be cautious. I would guard my heart and protect my son and never forget that the gulf between a duke and a governess was vast and unbridgeable. But I would go back to Hartwell House tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Because Sebastian was right about one thing. Some things were worth destroying oneself for. When I arrived at Ravensbrook Manor, the house was dark except for a single lamp burning in the entrance hall. I slipped through the servants' entrance and climbed the back stairs to my room, moving as silently as I had learned to move in 3 years of invisibility. But when I opened my door, I found that I was not alone. Lady Portmore sat in the chair by my window, her face illuminated by the moonlight that streamed through the glass. She was still dressed for dinner, her gray silk gown shimmering like mercury, her silver hair arranged in elaborate curls. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp as she watched me enter. "Miss Whitmore," she said, and her voice was calm and cold. "Close the door. We need to talk." My heart stopped. My blood turned to ice, and I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones like winter frost, that my carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around me. I closed the door. I stood before her like a child awaiting punishment, and I waited for the blow to fall. "I received a letter this evening," Lady Portmore said, "from Lady Constance Pemberton. She tells me that you have been visiting the Duke of Hartwell, alone, repeatedly. She suggests that I should be concerned about the moral character of the woman I have entrusted with my daughter's education." The room tilted. The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. Lady Constance had not waited. Lady Constance had struck first, swift and merciless, before Sebastian could mount any defense. "My lady," I began, but she raised a hand to silence me. "I do not wish to hear excuses, Miss Whitmore. I wish to hear the truth. Have you been visiting Hartwell House?" I could have lied. The word was on my lips, ready to be spoken, a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of my position. But I looked into Lady Portmore's eyes, and I saw something there that made me pause. Not anger, not disgust. Something that looked almost like concern. "Yes," I said quietly, "I have." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Portmore studied me for a long moment, her expression revealing nothing. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with weariness and something that might have been disappointment. "I see," she said. "And what is the nature of your relationship with the Duke?" "He owes me a debt, my lady. I helped him at the races, warned him about his horse. He wished to repay me. That is all." "That is all?" I swallowed hard. "Yes." Lady Portmore rose from her chair and walked to the window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost gentle. "I am not a fool, Miss Whitmore. I have seen the way you have changed these past days. The color in your cheeks, the light in your eyes, the distraction that clouds your thoughts when you think no one is watching. I know the signs of a woman in love." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. The Duke of Hartwell is a dangerous man, she continued. Not because he is cruel, but because he is powerful. Powerful men can destroy women like you without even meaning to. A word, a glance, a moment of indiscretion, and everything you have worked for can vanish like smoke. I know, my lady. Do you? She turned to face me, and I saw tears glistening in her eyes. Do you know what it is to love a man who cannot love you openly? To be hidden away like a shameful secret while he marries someone appropriate, someone acceptable, someone who fits the role society has decreed for him? Do you know the slow death of being second, always second, never enough? My lady. I was young once, she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. I loved a man once. He was not my husband. I stared at her, this woman I had served for 3 years, this woman I had thought I understood. And I realized that I knew nothing at all. What happened? I asked. He married someone else. I married Lord Portmore. We both did our duty, and we both died inside. And when he finally passed, I discovered that I could not even mourn him properly because I had never truly belonged to him in the first place. She crossed the room and took my hands in hers, and I felt the trembling in her fingers, the echo of a grief that had never quite healed. I am telling you this, she said, because I do not want you to make the same mistakes I made. If you love the Duke, if he loves you, then you must be very, very careful. Lady Constance is not your only enemy. Society itself will seek to destroy you. And if you are not strong enough, clever enough, ruthless enough, it will succeed. What should I do? I cannot tell you that. Only you can decide what your heart is worth, what sacrifices you are willing to make, what risks you are willing to take. But I can tell you this, Miss Whitmore, whatever you decide, I will not dismiss you. You have been good to my daughters. You have been loyal and kind and honest. And I know, better than anyone, how rare those qualities are in this world. The tears came then, tears I could not stop, tears I did not try to stop. I sank to my knees before her, and I wept, and she held me as my mother might have held me if she had lived, as no one had held me since I was a girl. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you, my lady. Do not thank me yet, she said, and there was sadness in her voice, deep and old and terribly familiar. Thank me when you have survived this. Thank me when you have found your way to the other side of the storm. And if you do not, if the worst should happen, know that there will always be a place for you here, for you and your son. I looked up at her, stunned. You know, I have always known. A governess who visits a family in the country whenever she has leave. A governess who sends half her wages to that same family. A governess who weeps in her room on the anniversary of a date no one else remembers. I am not blind, Miss Whitmore. I have simply chosen not to see. I had no words. I had no thoughts. I had only gratitude, vast and overwhelming, for this woman who had given me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. Go to bed, Lady Portmore said gently. Rest. Tomorrow will come whether we are ready for it or not, and whatever happens next, you will need your strength. She left me then, closing the door softly behind her, and I sat on the floor of my small room and stared at the moonlight and wondered how my life had become so complicated, so dangerous, so terrifyingly alive. I thought of Sebastian, of his kiss, of his promise to protect me. I thought of Lady Constance, of her letter, of the threat that hung over my head like a sword. I thought of my son, of his innocent face, of everything I stood to lose. And I thought of Lady Portmore, of her unexpected kindness, of the confession that had revealed her to be not just my employer, but my ally. The storm was coming. I could feel it gathering on the horizon, dark and inevitable and impossible to escape. But for the first time in years, I was not facing it alone. The weeks that followed were a strange and fragile peace, a held breath between heartbeats, the hush before thunder breaks across a summer sky. Lady Constance did not strike again immediately. Sebastian had sent her a letter of his own, the contents of which he refused to share with me, and whatever he had written seemed to have given her pause. She disappeared from London society entirely, retreating to her country estate in Hampshire, and the whispers that had begun to circulate about the Duke and his mysterious governess faded into silence. But I knew better than to believe the danger had passed. Lady Constance was not the kind of woman who surrendered easily. She was regrouping, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when she did, I suspected the blow would be far more devastating than a simple letter to my employer. In the meantime, I continued my visits to Hartwell House. We were more careful now, Sebastian and I. The carriage no longer came to Ravensbrook Manor, but waited for me at a crossroads 2 miles distant, where I walked on my half-days with a basket over my arm as if I were merely gathering herbs from the hedgerows. We met in different rooms each time, never the study where servants might expect to find him, but the music room with its shrouded piano, the conservatory with its jungle of ferns and orchids, the private library on the 3rd floor where no one went anymore. We talked for hours. We read poetry to each other, Tennyson and Shelley and the Brownings, their words giving voice to feelings we could not yet fully express ourselves. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the rain streak down the window panes or the fire die slowly to embers. And sometimes, when the ache became too great to bear, we kissed, soft and desperate and fleeting, always pulling apart before we could lose ourselves entirely. I had never known intimacy like this. The man who had fathered my son had wanted only my body, and he had taken it with a carelessness that left bruises on my soul long after the marks on my skin had faded. But Sebastian wanted all of me, my thoughts and my dreams and my fears, the stories I had never told anyone, the hopes I had buried so deep I had forgotten they existed. He listened when I spoke as if my words were precious things. He remembered details I had mentioned only once, weaving them into our conversations days later. He made me feel, for the first time in my life, that I was worth knowing. And I learned him in return. I learned that he hated strawberries but loved blackberries, that he read Latin for pleasure but found French tedious, that he had once wanted to be a composer, and still sometimes sat alone at the piano in the dark, playing melodies no one else would ever hear. I learned that he woke from nightmares about his brother, that he kept Edmund's last letter in a locked drawer beside his bed, that he had never forgiven himself for the silence that had allowed his father to drive Edmund away. I learned that beneath the marble exterior of the Duke of Hartwell was a man as broken and lonely as I was. And I loved him for it, loved him with a ferocity that terrified me, loved him in a way I had sworn I would never love anyone again. It was in late October, when the leaves had turned to fire and the air carried the first bite of coming winter, that Sebastian made his proposal. We were in the conservatory, surrounded by the green and growing things that seemed to defy the dying world outside. I was sitting on a wrought iron bench, my head resting against his shoulder, his arm wrapped around me in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The rain was falling, a soft and steady percussion against the glass roof, and I remember thinking that I had never been so content, so perfectly at peace. "I want you to meet him," Sebastian said quietly. "Your son." I lifted my head and looked at him, uncertain I had heard correctly. "What?" "I have made arrangements. The family who cares for him, they believe you are his aunt. They have agreed to allow you to visit this weekend, and I wish to accompany you." He paused, and I saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something that looked almost like fear. "I want to know him, Clara. I want to be part of his life, of both your lives." The words stole my breath. I stared at him, this man who had every reason to distance himself from my scandal, my shame, my illegitimate child. A duke did not acknowledge such things. A duke did not involve himself in the messy, complicated lives of fallen women. A duke certainly did not ask to meet the bastard son of a governess as if he were an honored guest rather than a stain to be hidden. "Sebastian," I whispered, "do you understand what you are saying?" "I understand perfectly." He took my hands in his, and his grip was warm and steady, an anchor in the storm of my confusion. "I am saying that I love you, Clara Whitmore. Not just the woman you are when you are with me, but all of you. Your past, your pain, your child. I want to know everything. I want to share everything. I want to build something real with you, something that matters, even if the world will never understand." The tears came then, silent and hot, streaming down my cheeks like the rain that streamed down the glass. I had dreamed of hearing these words. I had forbidden myself from dreaming of hearing these words. And now that they had been spoken, I did not know how to respond. "He cannot know," I said finally. "My son. He cannot know who his mother truly is. The deception is too deep, too old. If he learned the truth now, it would destroy him. I know. I am not asking to tell him anything. I am simply asking to meet him, to see the child you love so fiercely, to understand the part of your heart that you have kept hidden from me." Sebastian lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against my knuckles. "Let me do this, Clara. Let me prove to you that my love is not just words. I should have refused. I should have protected my son from any entanglement with a duke, any complication that might draw attention to the careful lies I had constructed around his existence. But I looked into Sebastian's eyes, and I saw the sincerity there, the desperate need to be more than he had been, to love better than he had loved, and I said yes. The journey to Hampshire took most of a day. Sebastian had arranged for a private carriage, one without his crest on the doors, and we traveled together in a cocoon of velvet and silence, watching the countryside roll past in shades of gold and rust and fading green. I had not seen my son in 3 months, and with every mile that passed, my heart beat faster, my hands grew colder, my anticipation sharpened into something almost painful. His name was Thomas. I had named him for my father, the only legacy I could give to a child who would never know his true family. He lived with the Hendersons, a childless couple who had been friends of my father before his death, and who had agreed to take the baby when I could no longer hide my condition. They believed the story I had told them, that Thomas was my sister's child, that his mother had died in childbirth, that I was the only family he had left. They loved him as their own, and I was grateful for that, grateful beyond words. But every visit was a knife in my heart, a reminder of all I had lost, all I had given up, all I could never reclaim. The Henderson cottage was small and neat, whitewashed walls and a thatched roof. A garden in front where the last roses of autumn still bloomed in defiance of the coming frost. I heard Thomas before I saw him, his laughter ringing out from behind the house, bright and clear and utterly unself-conscious. Sebastian helped me down from the carriage, and I stood for a moment in the lane, just listening, just breathing, just letting the sound of my son's joy wash over me like a blessing. "Are you ready?" Sebastian asked softly. "No," I said. "But I never am." We found Thomas in the back garden, playing with a wooden horse on wheels that Mr. Henderson had carved for his last birthday. He was small for his age, with hair the color of chestnuts and eyes that were my own, dark and serious and far too knowing for a child of 4. When he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that nearly stopped my heart. "Aunt Clara," he cried, and he ran to me, his small arms wrapping around my legs with a fierceness that made my eyes sting. "You came. You came." I knelt down and gathered him into my arms, burying my face in his hair, breathing in the scent of him. Soap and grass and something ineffably sweet. "Of course I came," I whispered. "I will always come." He pulled back and looked at me with those eyes that saw everything, that understood more than they should. "Who is that?" he asked, pointing at Sebastian, who stood a few feet away, watching us with an expression I could not read. I glanced at the Duke, uncertain how to explain him, uncertain what story I could possibly construct that would make sense to a child. But before I could speak, Sebastian stepped forward and crouched down to Thomas's level. "My name is Sebastian," he said, and his voice was gentle, softer than I had ever heard it. "I am a friend of your Aunt Clara. She has told me so much about you that I wanted to meet you myself." Thomas considered this with the grave seriousness that characterized all his interactions with adults. "Are you a good friend?" he asked. Sebastian smiled. "I am trying to be." "Do you like horses?" "I like them very much. I have a horse." Thomas held up the wooden toy proudly. "His name is Champion. He is the fastest horse in all of England." Sebastian examined the toy with an attention that would have been comical if it had not been so touching. "He is magnificent," he said solemnly. "I can see why he is the fastest. Look at those legs." Thomas beamed, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Some wall I had built so long ago I had forgotten it existed. I watched as my son and the man I loved knelt together in the garden, talking about wooden horses and real horses and everything in between, and I thought, this is what it could be. This is what a family could look like. The afternoon passed in a golden haze. We had tea with the Hendersons, who were clearly curious about the well-dressed gentleman who had accompanied me, but too polite to ask questions. We walked in the garden, Thomas insisting on holding both my hand and Sebastian's, chattering endlessly about the adventures of Champion and the friends he had made in the village and the kitten that Mrs. Henderson had promised him for Christmas. We sat by the fire as evening fell, and Sebastian read aloud from a book of fairy tales while Thomas curled against my side, his small body warm and trusting. When it was time to put Thomas to bed, he clung to me with a desperation that broke my heart anew each time I left. "Do you have to go?" he asked, his voice small and plaintive. "Can you not stay forever?" I smoothed his hair back from his forehead and pressed a kiss against his brow. "I cannot stay forever, my darling. But I will come back. I will always come back. Promise?" "I promise." He released me reluctantly, and Mrs. Henderson carried him up to his room, and I stood in the doorway of the cottage with tears streaming down my face, watching until the light in his window went dark. Sebastian's arms wrapped around me from behind, and I leaned into him, drawing strength from his warmth, his solidity, his unwavering presence. "He is extraordinary," Sebastian murmured against my hair. "You have given him everything, Clara, everything good and bright and true. I have given him lies. You have given him love. That is all that matters." I turned in his arms and looked up at him, at this man who had seen my deepest shame and loved me anyway, who had knelt in the dirt with my illegitimate son and treated him as if he were precious, as if he mattered. "What are we doing?" I asked, and my voice was raw with emotion. "What can possibly come of this?" "I do not know," he said honestly. "I only know that I cannot imagine my life without you anymore, without either of you." He kissed me then, there in the darkness outside the cottage, with the stars wheeling overhead and the wind whispering through the dying leaves. It was a different kiss than the ones we had shared before, deeper and more desperate, a promise and a plea and a declaration all at once. When we finally broke apart, we were both trembling. "We should go," I said, "before we are missed." "Yes." But neither of us moved. We stood there, holding each other, unwilling to let go of the moment, unwilling to return to a world that would never accept what we had found. It was only later, as the carriage carried us back through the darkness toward our separate lives, that I saw the rider. He was waiting at the crossroads where I usually met Sebastian's carriage, a dark figure on a dark horse, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. As we approached, he spurred his mount forward, blocking our path, and the coachman pulled the horses to a stop with a curse. Sebastian tensed beside me. "Stay here," he said, and before I could protest, he had thrown open the carriage door and stepped out into the night. I watched through the window as he approached the rider, saw them exchange words I could not hear. The rider handed Sebastian something, a letter perhaps, or a note, and then he wheeled his horse and vanished into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. When Sebastian returned to the carriage, his face was pale, his jaw tight with fury. "What is it?" I asked, dread coiling in my stomach. "What has happened?" He held out the paper and I took it with shaking hands. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, achingly familiar. Lady Constance. She had not been waiting, she had not been planning, she had been watching. The letter was brief, only a few lines, but each word was a dagger aimed at my heart. "I know about the boy," she had written. "I know where he lives, who he thinks he is, who his mother truly is. You have until the end of the week to announce your engagement to me, Your Grace, or all of London will know your precious governess's secret. And then we shall see how long she remains precious to you." The paper fell from my fingers. The world tilted and spun. I heard Sebastian calling my name, felt his hands gripping my shoulders, but I could not respond, could not speak, could not think. Lady Constance knew about Thomas. Lady Constance would destroy him to get what she wanted, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. The days that followed were the darkest I had ever known, darker even than the night I gave birth alone in a stranger's house, biting down on a leather strap to muffle my screams. Darker than the morning I handed my newborn son to the Hendersons and walked away with empty arms and a shattered heart. Lady Constance had given us until the end of the week. 5 days to surrender everything or watch my son's life be destroyed by scandal before it had truly begun. Sebastian wanted to fight. He paced his study like a caged animal, proposing scheme after scheme, each more desperate than the last. He would expose Lady Constance's own secrets, the affairs she had conducted, the debts she had accumulated, the rumors about how her first husband had really died. He would use his influence to have her banished from society. He would pay her off, whatever sum she demanded, whatever it took to buy her silence. But I knew Lady Constance better than he did. I had watched her from the shadows at parties and dinners, studied the cold calculation in her eyes, the ruthless ambition that drove her every action. She did not want money. She did not fear exposure. She wanted Sebastian, wanted the title and the power and the prestige that came with being the Duchess of Hartwell, and she would burn down the entire world to get it. On the 3rd day, I made my decision. I found Sebastian in the conservatory, staring out at the gray November rain, his shoulders bowed with a weariness I had never seen in him before. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and the hope that flickered in his eyes nearly broke my resolve. "I have to leave," I said, and my voice did not tremble, though my heart was shattering with every word. "I have to disappear. Take Thomas and go somewhere. Lady Constance will never find us. It is the only way. No." The word was sharp, immediate, a refusal that brooked no argument. "I will not let you run. I will not let that woman drive you from your home, from your life, from me. She has won, Sebastian. Do you not understand? She holds all the cards. If I stay, she will destroy Thomas. She will tell the world that he is mine, that I am a fallen woman, that I have been deceiving everyone for 4 years. He will grow up marked by my shame, punished for my sin. I cannot let that happen. And what of us?" His voice cracked, and I saw the tears he was fighting to contain, saw the devastation that my words had wrought. "What of everything we have built? Everything we have dreamed?" I crossed the room and took his face in my hands, memorizing every line, every shadow, every beloved inch of him. "What we have built will live in my heart forever," I whispered. "What we have dreamed will sustain me through whatever darkness lies ahead. But I cannot sacrifice my son for my own happiness, Sebastian. Not even for you. Surely you understand that." He closed his eyes, and a single tear escaped, trailing down his cheek to wet my fingers. "I understand," he said. "God help me, but I understand. But I cannot accept it. I cannot simply let you walk away. You must. No." He opened his eyes, and I saw something new there, something fierce and determined and utterly unbreakable. There is another way. There must be another way, and I am going to find it. Before I could respond, he pulled away from me and strode from the room, leaving me alone among the ferns and orchids, wondering what madness he was planning now. I did not see him for the rest of that day, nor the next. Mr. Harding informed me that the Duke had gone to London on urgent business and would return as soon as possible. I waited at Ravensbrook, teaching my lessons with mechanical precision, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until Lady Constance's deadline fell like a guillotine blade. On the 5th day, the day of reckoning, a carriage arrived for me at dawn. It was not Sebastian's carriage. It was grander, more ornate, bearing a crest I did not recognize. The footman who descended wore livery of crimson and gold, and when he spoke, his voice was formal and precise. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you are summoned to Carlton House. Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Kent requests your presence immediately." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. The Duchess of Kent? The mother of Princess Victoria, the heir presumptive to the throne. What could such a woman possibly want with a governess from Hampshire? But the footman was already opening the carriage door, and I found myself climbing inside, as if in a dream, my mind spinning with questions I could not begin to answer. Carlton House was a palace of marble and gilt, its halls echoing with the whispers of centuries. I was led through corridors lined with paintings and tapestries, past footmen who stood like statues at every door, until I reached a private sitting room where a woman waited by the fire. She was older than I had expected, her hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the cares of a difficult life. But her eyes were sharp and kind, and when she smiled, I felt some of my terror ease. "Miss Whitmore," she said, and her voice was warm with a German accent that had never quite faded. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." I sat, and she sat across from me, and for a long moment we simply looked at each other. Two women from different worlds, separated by an unbridgeable gulf of rank and privilege. "The Duke of Hartwell came to see me yesterday," the Duchess said finally. "He told me a remarkable story, a story of a governess who saved him from ruin with a whispered warning. A story of love that bloomed in the most unlikely of places. A story of a woman who has been persecuted for daring to reach above her station." "Your Royal Highness," I began, but she raised a hand to silence me. "I know what it is to love a man the world did not approve of," she continued softly. "My husband was not the match my family wanted for me. He had debts, he had enemies, he had a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. But I loved him, and I married him, and I have never regretted it. Not for a single day." I did not know what to say. I sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding against my ribs. "The Duke asked for my help," the Duchess said. "He asked me to intervene on your behalf, to use what influence I have to protect you from those who would destroy you." It was a bold request, some might say an impertinent one. But I saw in his eyes what I once saw in my Edward's eyes, the desperation of a man who has found something precious and will do anything to keep it. "And will you help?" I whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Will you help us?" The Duchess smiled. "I have already begun." She explained then, in her calm and measured voice, what she had done. A letter had been sent to Lady Constance, bearing the royal seal, informing her that her conduct had come to the attention of the Crown, and that any further attempts to spread scandal or persecute innocent persons would be met with the severest consequences. Lady Constance's debts, which were considerable, had been called in by creditors who owed favors to certain members of the royal household. Her invitations to court functions had been quietly revoked. Her name had been removed from the guest lists of the season's most important events. In short, the Duchess said, Lady Constance Pemberton has discovered that there are powers in this world greater than her own ambition. She will trouble you no more." The tears came then, tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears of joy so overwhelming I could barely breathe. I slid from my chair and knelt at the Duchess's feet, my head bowed, my body shaking with sobs I could not control. "Thank you," I gasped. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. I can never repay you. I can never." She reached down and lifted my chin, forcing me to meet her eyes. "You can repay me by living well," she said gently, "by loving the Duke as he deserves to be loved, by raising your son to be a good man, a kind man, a man who judges others by their hearts and not their circumstances. That is all I ask, Miss Whitmore. That is all I will ever ask." I left Carlton House in a daze, my mind still reeling, my heart still racing. The carriage carried me through the streets of London, past the grand houses and the crowded markets and the endless stream of humanity that flowed through the city like blood through veins. And when I finally arrived at Hartwell House, I found Sebastian waiting for me on the steps. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his cravat askew, his hair disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. But when he saw me, when he saw the expression on my face, he smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "She told you," he said. "She told me." And I threw myself into his arms, and he caught me, lifting me off my feet, spinning me around in a display of joy that would have scandalized every proper person in London if anyone had been watching. "I love you," I said against his neck. "I love you, Sebastian Vance. I love you more than I have ever loved anything." He set me down, but did not release me, his arms wrapped around me as if he would never let go. "Then marry me," he said. "Today, tomorrow, as soon as it can be arranged. I do not want to spend another day without you by my side." I pulled back and looked at him, at this man who had moved mountains for me, who had gone to royalty itself to protect me from a threat I had thought insurmountable. "You would marry me?" I asked. "A governess? A woman with an illegitimate child? A woman who would bring scandal to your name and shame to your family?" "I would marry the woman I love," he said simply. "The woman who saw a lame horse when no one else did. The woman who touched my arm and spoke the truth when everyone else was too afraid. The woman who taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, velvet-covered, worn with age. Inside, nestled against a bed of silk, was a ring. A single sapphire, deep blue as a midnight sky, surrounded by a halo of diamonds that caught the light and scattered it like stars. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "She gave it to my grandfather on the day they married, a symbol of her love, a promise that she would stand beside him through whatever storms might come. He kept it with him always, even after she died. He said it reminded him that some things are stronger than death." He took my hand and slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. "Marry me, Clara," he said again. "Be my wife. Be the Duchess of Hartwell. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you." I looked at the ring on my finger, at the man before me, at the impossible, miraculous, beautiful future that had suddenly opened up before us. "Yes," I said. "Yes, Sebastian. 1,000 times yes." We were married 3 weeks later in the chapel at Hartwell House, with only a handful of witnesses present. Lady Portmore came, and she wept with joy throughout the ceremony. The Hendersons came, bringing Thomas, who did not understand why his Aunt Clara was wearing such a pretty dress, but who clapped and cheered when Sebastian kissed me at the altar. Even the Duchess of Kent sent a gift, a set of silver candlesticks with a note that read simply, "For the light you have brought to each other's lives." The scandal, when it came, was less than we had feared. Lady Constance, true to the Duchess's prediction, had retreated to the continent, too humiliated and financially ruined to show her face in English society again. There were whispers, of course. There were always whispers. A duke marrying a governess. A woman of no family, no fortune, no consequence. But Sebastian weathered them all with a dignity that silenced even the most vicious critics, and slowly, gradually, society came to accept what it could not change. And Thomas? Thomas came to live with us at Hartwell House. We told him the truth, eventually, when he was old enough to understand. I will never forget the look on his face when I confessed that I was not his aunt but his mother, that I had given him away because I could not keep him, that I had loved him every moment of every day we had been apart. He cried. I cried. Sebastian held us both. And then Thomas looked up at me with those dark, knowing eyes and said, I always knew. I always knew you were my real mother. How? I asked, my voice breaking. How could you possibly have known? Because you looked at me the way the Hendersons looked at each other, he said. Like I was the most important thing in the world. Like you would die for me. Like nothing else mattered. I gathered him into my arms and held him until the tears stopped, until the pain became something bearable, until the wounds of 4 long years finally began to heal. Sebastian adopted Thomas officially, making him the heir to the Hartwell title, the son of a duke instead of the bastard of a governess. It was a bold move, one that raised eyebrows and provoked commentary in every drawing room in London. But Sebastian did not care. He had learned, he told me, that the opinions of others were worth less than the love of those who truly mattered. Years passed. The world changed around us, as worlds do. Queens rose and fell. Wars were fought and won and lost. The horses that had once run at Ascot grew old and died, replaced by new generations of magnificent creatures who knew nothing of a governess who had once saved a duke from ruin. But we remained. I am writing this now, in the winter of my 60th year, from the window seat of the private library on the 3rd floor of Hartwell House. The same library where Sebastian first kissed me, so many years ago. The same library where Thomas proposed to his own wife, a bright-eyed girl from a good family who loved him for himself and not his title. The same library where I have sat on countless evenings, watching the seasons change, watching our children grow, watching the miracle of our improbable love story unfold day by day. Sebastian is downstairs, reading by the fire. His hair is silver now, and his step has slowed, but his eyes are still the color of winter storms, and they still light up when he sees me enter a room. He still reaches for my hand when we walk together through the gardens. He still whispers that he loves me every night before we fall asleep, as if the words might lose their power if they are not spoken aloud. I have been blessed beyond measure. I know this. A fallen woman, a governess, a mother who gave away her child, and yet I have been given more happiness than I ever dared to dream. A husband who loves me, a son who forgave me, a life of meaning and purpose and joy. But I have also learned, in the long years of my extraordinary life, that blessings do not come to those who wait for them. They come to those who are brave enough to reach for them, even when the reaching seems impossible. They come to those who speak the truth, even when the truth might destroy them. They come to those who love with their whole hearts, even when love means risking everything. I was nobody the moment before I ruined a duke. I was a governess in a plain gray dress, invisible and insignificant, content to live in the shadows of other people's lives. But then I saw a lame horse, and I spoke, and everything changed. That is the lesson I wish to leave behind, for Thomas, for his children, for all the invisible women who will come after me. Do not be silent. Do not be small. Do not let the world convince you that you are worthless simply because you were not born to wealth and privilege. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Your love matters. Reach for the life you want, even if your hands tremble. Speak the words that burn in your heart, even if your voice shakes. Love without reservation, without condition, without fear. Because some things are worth destroying yourself for. And some things, the best things, the truest things, will build you back up again, stronger and brighter and more beautiful than before. I know, I am living proof. I am